You'll remove that swing by tomorrow or face $500 a day in fines," Cynthia Bellamy said, her voice dripping with smug authority as she stood on my porch. Cynthia, the president of our HOA board, crossed her arms like a judge delivering a sentence. And when my wife, Emily, tried to explain that she was 7 months pregnant and needed that swing to rest, Cynthia smirked, leaned closer, and hissed, "Pregnant or not, the rules don't bend for you." I felt the words burn, but my answer came colder than she expected. "Those fines won't stick, Cynthia. That swing predates your HOA charter by 20 years. It's protected by grandfathered rights." Her smile faltered just enough for me to notice, and in that instant, I knew she had no idea I wasn't just another homeowner afraid of her paper threats. Before I continue, I need to tell you, subscribe right now, because what happened next spiraled far beyond HOA politics. What you're about to hear isn't just about fines and notices. It's about assault, a courtroom showdown, and a judge gasping out loud in disbelief. I straightened my shoulders, my voice steady. "Daniel Mercer," I said, introducing myself like I was entering a courtroom again. "Former Army JAG officer, property law attorney. I know exactly how far your power goes, and how fast it collapses when you overreach." The porch fell silent for a beat. Cynthia blinked, her smug confidence cracking for a fraction of a second before she rallied. "That swing behind me wasn't just old wood. It was my father's. He'd built it with his own hands before he died, fighting a house fire that nearly consumed our street." Emily sat there most afternoons, her hand resting on her stomach, breathing slow to ease the weight pressing on her ribs. That seat was the one place she could feel comfort, peace, and my father's presence. To Cynthia, it was a violation. To us, it was sanctuary. The neighborhood stretched out around us, manicured lawns, pressure-washed driveways, and the quiet suffocation of HOA control. But right here, on my porch, everything boiled down to this swing. Cynthia thought she was delivering a routine threat, another notch in her belt of intimidation. What she didn't understand was that this time she'd chosen the wrong family. She wasn't just tampering with property. She was threatening the last thing tying my wife to her sense of safety. I glanced at Emily, who gripped the armrest with white knuckles, her eyes shining with restrained anger. She didn't cry, she didn't plead. She simply looked at me, as if to say, "Not again, not this time." And I nodded because she was right. This wasn't about compliance. This was about dignity, about legacy, about a child who hadn't even been born yet being targeted before taking his first breath. And that's when I realized Cynthia's arrogance had already handed me the rope she'd hang herself with. She wanted a war over a swing. I was ready to fight. With weapons she didn't know existed, the law, the truth, and the courage to drag her into the light where the whole neighborhood would finally see who she really was. Cynthia didn't flinch when I said I was ready to drag her into the light. She tilted her chin upward, eyes narrowing into that practiced look of superiority she wore like armor. "You talk a big game, Mr. Mercer," she said, "but the board already voted. The fines are approved, and your appeal window has closed." She spun on her heel, clicking down my steps like she'd just delivered a death sentence. I let her go. For now. Because the truth was, she'd made her first mistake by assuming I was bluffing. The second would come later, when she pushed past intimidation and crossed into outright violence. I could already see it in the way she carried herself. Too comfortable, too certain no one would challenge her. That night, the neighborhood HOA office glowed like a lighthouse at the end of the cul-de-sac. The office was really a converted model home, a brick facade with manicured shrubs and a permanent scent of lavender air freshener. It was where Cynthia held her meetings, where residents went in sheepishly to pay dues or contest fines, and it was where I needed to see her in her true element. Emily wanted to come with me, but I told her no. She needed rest, and the tension was already weighing on her. Instead, I walked the 2 blocks alone, the warm night air heavy, crickets buzzing in the yards. Each step was a reminder of why I was doing this, not just for me, but for her and for the life she carried inside her. When I entered the office, Cynthia was seated behind a faux oak desk stacked with files, her board members flanking her like guards. She looked up slowly, a queen acknowledging a subject. Terrell Gaines, the treasurer, sat to her right. His body language gave him away immediately. Shoulders tense, hands clasped, eyes darting between me and the floor. He didn't like this. "Mr. Mercer," Cynthia said, leaning back in her chair, "I hope you're here to settle your balance. Non-compliance isn't cheap." I didn't sit. "You'll be refunding every fine you've ever tried to place on my swing," I said evenly. "And if you keep pressing this, you'll be facing something a lot heavier than a ledger." She laughed, loud and performative. "Oh, please. Do you think threats scare me? This is Lakeside Estates. We built this community on order and discipline. Without the HOA, property values plummet. People like you ruin everything we stand for." Her words echoed around the room, bouncing off stage furniture and polished tile. I noticed Tyrell shift uncomfortably, his lips pressed together as if he wanted to speak, but fear kept him quiet. He wouldn't step in now, but the crack in his composure was the first sign I needed. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so the others had to strain to hear. "Order and discipline don't mean assaulting residents. They don't mean targeting pregnant women. You've crossed a line, Cynthia, and when the county sees the report, no title in this neighborhood will protect you." Her smile faltered, just slightly, before she covered it with another smirk. "You're bluffing. No one will believe you. This board stands united." She gestured toward the others, and they nodded, though their eyes betrayed unease. I left before she could speak again. There was no point in dragging it further tonight. What mattered was that I'd planted the first seed of doubt, in her mind, in her board, and especially in Terrell's. Seeds grow, especially under pressure. The walk home felt different. Porch lights flickered on around me, neighbors peeking through blinds as if they knew the storm was brewing, but didn't dare open the door. Fear was the HOA's currency, and Cynthia had minted more of it than anyone else. But fear loses value when someone finally refuses to spend it. Back at my porch, Emily sat on the swing, rocking gently in the dim glow of our porch light. She looked up at me with questioning eyes, and I told her simply, "She thinks she's invincible. That's about to change." The swing creaked softly as I sat beside her, the night closing in around us. Cynthia believed this battle was about compliance and fines. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that it had already shifted into something far larger. She had turned our fight into a test of justice itself, and I wasn't stepping away until justice slammed down on her like a gavel. The creak of the swing was still in my ears the next morning when I drove down to the community pool complex. Lakeside Estates' crown jewel, an Olympic-sized pool with a pristine clubhouse, was where the board always tried to display their authority most visibly. Rules taped to the walls, cameras tucked in corners, lifeguards trained to report infractions. If Cynthia liked to hold court at the office, this was her throne room. I hadn't come for her, though. I'd come for Tyrell Gaines. I knew from the moment I saw his face in that meeting he was carrying more than he wanted to. A man who clenches his hands until his knuckles whiten, who shifts in his chair when power is being abused. He's already halfway to admitting the truth. Tyrell was at the poolside gate, clipboard in hand, overseeing a maintenance check. He spotted me instantly and stiffened. His shoulders squared, but his eyes told the real story. A flicker of recognition, then hesitation. I raised a hand in greeting, casual but direct. "Morning, Tyrell," I said. "Looks like you're keeping this place running smooth." He gave a tight nod. "Just doing what the board asks." His voice was even, but his jaw worked like he was grinding down words he didn't want to say. He wouldn't meet my eyes, instead focusing on the chlorine test strips like they held the secrets of the universe. I leaned on, the gate keeping my tone easy. "I get it. Everyone's got their role. But yesterday, you looked like a man who wasn't sure he wanted to keep playing along." His hand froze over the clipboard, just for a second. Then he cleared his throat, scribbled something on the paper, and said, "The board's united. You heard Cynthia." But his body betrayed him. His left foot tapped against the concrete, restless. His shoulders slumped even as he tried to straighten them. He glanced over at the lifeguard stand, then back to me, lowering his voice as if afraid the chlorine itself might report him. "It's not as simple as you think," he murmured. That was all I needed, the crack widening. I didn't push too hard. Instead, I let silence hang between us, broken only by the splashes of a few early swimmers. Tyrell shifted again, finally lifting his eyes to mine. They were tired, rimmed with guilt. "You've seen what she does," I said quietly. "This isn't about property values. It's about control. And it's about my wife, my pregnant wife. being shoved off our porch swing into the street. He flinched at that, the clipboard pressing harder into his chest as though it could shield him. I didn't agree with that, he said, the words rushing out in a low whisper. But she doesn't listen. You know how Cynthia is. If I speak up, I'm done. She'll bury me. I stepped closer, not threatening, just firm. Terrell, you've got more power than you realize. You keep the books, you know the rules, and deep down, you know this isn't what you signed up for. You're not the villain here. But silence makes you her partner. His Adam's apple bobbed, his hands clenched tighter around the clipboard until his fingers trembled. He looked past me, out to the sparkling water of the pool, like maybe it held the clarity he was desperate for. For a moment, I thought he might bolt. Instead, he whispered, "She's gone too far." The words came like a confession ripped out of him. His shoulders sagged, his stance collapsing into resignation. Then, almost instantly, he straightened again, shaking his head hard. "Forget I said that. I can't." He cut himself off, turned his back, and stalked toward the clubhouse doors. But I saw it, the hesitation, the guilt, the truth fighting inside him like a caged animal. He wanted out. He wanted someone to force open the bars so he could breathe again. I let him go, just as I'd let Cynthia walk away the night before. Sometimes you don't win by hammering the wall. Sometimes you win by finding the crack and waiting for the pressure to do the rest. As I left the pool, the sun glaring off the water, I knew Terrell was my key. He wasn't ready to turn yet, but when Cynthia pushed further, and she would, his conscience would force him to step out of her shadow. And when that moment came, I'd be ready to pull him into the light. I walked away from the pool, knowing Terrell was already leaning toward the truth. He just needed the final shove. Cynthia would deliver that herself. But I couldn't wait around hoping. I had to prepare for the moment she crossed the line completely, and that meant documenting every abuse with precision. The next board meeting was announced in the community clubhouse, the heart of Lakeside Estates. It was the kind of place designed to look welcoming, gleaming hardwood floors, framed photos of happy residents, fake plants in polished pots. But beneath the surface, it was just another arena where Cynthia staged her performances. I decided that was where I'd make my first stand. Emily begged me not to bring her, but she insisted on coming anyway. "She won't stop if I hide," she told me, her voice steady even though her hands rested protectively on her stomach. I hated the thought of exposing her to more stress, but she was right. Cynthia needed to see the face of the woman she'd shoved into the street, and the neighbors needed to see it too. We arrived early, sitting near the front, where every board member would have to look directly at us. The room filled quickly, residents murmuring, papers shuffling, the low buzz of unease. Everyone knew there was tension brewing, though most kept their heads down, afraid of being the next target. Cynthia entered like a queen, heels clicking, pearls at her throat, a thin smile plastered on her face. She looked past us at first, as if ignoring us would erase the memory of what she'd done. But when her eyes finally landed on Emily, her smile froze for half a heartbeat before returning sharper, colder. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, tapping the microphone, "we'll start with compliance violations." She flipped through her stack of papers with theatrical disdain. First order of business, the Mercer residence. Gasps rippled through the room. People had expected my name to come up, but the audacity of making it first on the list, when the whole neighborhood had heard the rumors about her shoving Emily, was too bold even for her. "Our porch swing," I said loudly, cutting her off before she could launch into her rehearsed speech. The room went silent. Installed 20 years before this HOA was ever incorporated, protected under state grandfathering statutes. Yet here we are, harassed with fines and threats. Cynthia leaned into the mic, her smile twisting. "Mr. Mercer, this is not a courtroom. You don't get to grandstand here." I stood slowly, letting my chair scrape across the floor. "You're right. This isn't a courtroom. But I know exactly where this is headed, and when it gets there, every word spoken in this room will be on record." A murmur spread through the crowd. Eyes darted between Cynthia and me, neighbors whispering, some nodding quietly. For the first time, the fear in the room wasn't just directed at her. It was shifting. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Terrell, at the far end of the board table. His posture was rigid, his hands clenched around a pen, He wasn't speaking, but his eyes flickered with conflict. I knew he wanted to say something, but fear locked his jaw. Cynthia slammed her papers down. This meeting will not be hijacked by one homeowner's theatrics. The fines stand. The board stands united. But even as she said it, the room told a different story. I heard muttered protests. Someone whispered, "It's just a swing." Another, "She pushed his wife." It was the first crack in the silence that had protected her for years. I let the noise build for a moment before speaking again, calm but firm. "You think you can bury us under fines. You think intimidation works forever. But you crossed a line when you put your hands on my wife. And now, Cynthia, you don't get to decide how this ends. The law will." Her eyes flashed with fury, and for the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a cornered predator. She opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of the gavel, Judge Price's gavel, in my mind, was already echoing in my head. This wasn't the final showdown, not yet. But in that clubhouse, under the fluorescent lights and the gaze of uneasy neighbors, the balance of power shifted. Cynthia had revealed her arrogance to the very people she needed silent, and silence was no longer guaranteed. The murmurs from the clubhouse meeting carried into the next day like smoke after a fire. Neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed me on the sidewalk, but their quick glances said everything. People were starting to wonder if Cynthia was truly untouchable. And once doubt creeps in, it spreads faster than fear. I knew I needed to press the advantage. Waiting for Cynthia to make her next move would only let her regain control. The key was to build a trail of evidence outside her grasp, somewhere she couldn't manipulate or intimidate. That's why I went to the county records office, a beige concrete building downtown that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. It was the opposite of Lakeside's polished clubhouse, and that contrast gave me confidence. This place wasn't built for intimidation. It was built for accountability. Walking through the revolving doors, I carried a folder under my arm, printouts of every violation notice Cynthia had sent, each stamped with dates and amounts. I'd highlighted the outrageous escalation of fines, some doubling in less than a week. More importantly, I carried Emily's medical note from her physician documenting the stress Cynthia's harassment had caused, including a warning about elevated blood pressure. At the counter, I requested access to HOA filings under state property statutes. The clerk, a middle-aged man with reading glasses perched on his nose, retrieved a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. He slid it across the desk with a grunt. "HOA filings for Lakeside Estates. Everything's in here." I flipped through the pages, my legal training guiding me to the incorporation documents, the bylaws, and the list of amendments filed over the years. I wasn't looking for a hidden clause. That would break my own rule against magical paperwork victories. No, what I needed was proof of overreach, proof that Cynthia had used her office to abuse power in a way no judge could ignore. It didn't take long. Buried in the compliance section was a provision requiring all fines to be approved by majority board vote and documented in meeting minutes. I knew from my time at the meetings that Cynthia often acted alone, issuing notices before the board ever convened. The paperwork in my folder proved it. Dozens of fines sent on dates with no official meetings recorded. This wasn't just harassment. It was a violation of her own bylaws, a legal crack I could widen until the whole facade collapsed. I copied the relevant sections and added them to my growing file. Each page was another nail in the coffin of Cynthia's authority. By the time I left the records office, the weight in my arms felt less like paper and more like ammunition. Driving back into Lakeside, I passed the manicured entrance sign, brick pillars, wrought iron lettering, flowers arranged in perfect symmetry. It looked pristine, but I knew better now. That beauty was paid for with fear, intimidation, and fines that had no legal standing. The residents just didn't know it yet. When I got home, Emily was sitting on the porch swing again, her hand resting on her stomach. She looked up at me, reading my expression before I said a word. "You found something?" she said softly. I sat beside her, the swing groaning under our weight. "She's been issuing fines without board approval, completely illegal. Once this goes in front of the judge, it won't just be about you being shoved into the street. It'll be about a pattern of abuse." Emily's eyes welled, but she blinked back the tears. "Do you think people will finally believe you?" "They won't have a choice," I said. "The law will speak louder than her threats." The swing creaked back and forth, a steady rhythm against the rising tension in the neighborhood. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower roared to life. Life went on as if nothing had changed, but in reality, everything had shifted, because now I wasn't just reacting to Cynthia's harassment. I was building the case that would dismantle her reign entirely. And when the time came, she wouldn't be facing just me. She'd be facing the county, the law, and the truth she could no longer bury. The file in my hands felt heavier with every passing hour, as if the weight of proof carried its own gravity. But proof is useless without visibility, and I knew Cynthia would do everything in her power to choke the truth before it reached daylight. That's why my next stop wasn't the courthouse, not yet. It was the sheriff's substation just outside town, a squat, brick building with a faded flag fluttering on its pole. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and copier toner. Deputies moved briskly between desks, radios crackling at their hips. I asked for Officer Ramirez, the same deputy who had responded when Emily was shoved into the street. Within minutes he appeared, his brow furrowed, arms crossed like he'd been expecting me. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I figured I might see you again." I laid the folder on his desk. "You remember what you saw at my house, but this isn't just about one assault. This is systemic abuse. She's issuing fines without board approval, targeting families, and now she's crossed into physical violence." Ramirez flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable, but the way his fingers lingered on the highlighted sections told me he understood. "You're saying she's acting outside the bylaws?" "Not saying," I replied. "Proving, and when it gets to court, the judge won't just see an angry neighbor. She'll see a president who turned an HOA into her personal weapon." Ramirez tapped a pen against the desk, the rhythm sharp, thoughtful. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll escalate this. But you should know, folks like Bellamy, they're used to making noise. She'll spin it, claim harassment, maybe even try to rally the board. You need to be ready for that." I leaned forward. "I've been ready since the day she put her hands on my wife." As I walked out of the substation, I felt the first real shift of momentum. Cynthia still held sway in Lakeside, but outside her gates, she had no shield, and I had just placed her name in front of people who didn't bow to her intimidation. Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere felt different. Maybe it was me, carrying the knowledge of what I'd set in motion, or maybe the residents could sense the cracks spreading in Cynthia's power. Curtains twitched as I drove past. Neighbors paused their yard work when they saw me, hesitated, then quickly went back to trimming hedges. Fear still clung to them, but it was thinning, thread by thread. That evening, Emily and I went to the Lakeside walking trail, a stretch of gravel path circling the water at the edge of the subdivision. It was a place we'd avoided lately because Cynthia often patrolled it, clipboard in hand, pretending to enforce leash rules or monitor landscaping. Tonight, though, it was ours. The sun bled orange across the lake, cicadas humming in the reeds. Emily squeezed my hand as we walked. "Do you think it'll be enough?" she asked. The papers, the deputy, the meetings. She's still so powerful here. I stopped, turning to face her. Power built on fear is fragile. All it takes is one crack in the foundation, and she's given me more than enough to drive a wedge through. She nodded, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Carrying our child was already hard enough. Carrying the weight of this battle on top of it was unbearable. That swing at home, the only place she could truly rest, had become more than a comfort. It was survival, and Cynthia had tried to tear even that away. We reached the far side of the trail, where the clubhouse lights glowed in the distance. A board meeting was scheduled again soon. I could already picture Cynthia sitting at that desk, pearls gleaming, smile sharp, pretending the world bent to her will. What she didn't know was that the sheriff's office now had their eyes on her, that her authority wasn't a fortress, but a crumbling wall. I pulled Emily close, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, the faint kick beneath her hand. "It won't be long now," I whispered. "She's already written the ending for herself. We just have to show the world." The lake rippled under the fading light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension ease. The battle wasn't won yet, but the battlefield had shifted. Cynthia had ruled Lakeside through intimidation. Soon she'd learn what it felt like when outside authority intervened, and this time, she wouldn't be the one holding the gavel. The night at the lake gave me a fleeting sense of peace, but by the next morning, the war was pressing down again. Cynthia was too quiet, and when someone like her went silent, it meant plotting, not surrender. I knew she'd try to regroup, maybe even weaponize the board against me. That's why, when I got a call from an unknown number around noon, I answered with caution. Daniel? The voice was low, strained. It's Terrell Gaines. For a second, I said nothing. Just the fact that he'd called was enough to jolt me. What's on your mind, Terrell? Not here, he muttered. Meet me at the maintenance shed by the tennis courts, half an hour. Then he hung up. The tennis courts were on the far edge of the subdivision, tucked behind a stand of pines. The shed beside them was little more than a cinder block cube with peeling paint and a sagging roof. I arrived early, leaning against the fence while kids volleyed a ball on the cracked asphalt. My gut churned with anticipation. If Terrell was breaking ranks, it could be the crack I'd been waiting for. When he arrived, he looked worse than before. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt rumpled, tie loosened. He scanned the area nervously before slipping into the shade of the shed. I followed, shutting the creaky door behind us. Cynthia doesn't know I'm here, he started, voice trembling. And if she finds out, I'm finished. I crossed my arms, watching him pace. You've been finished for a long time, Terrell. You just didn't admit it, so why now? He stopped pacing, dragging a hand down his face. Because last night she told me to falsify the minutes from the last board meeting. She wanted me to sign off that the fines against you were approved unanimously, even though there wasn't a vote. My jaw tightened. And did you? No. He shook his head quickly, hands trembling. I couldn't, but she'll find someone else or she'll do it herself. That's what she does. She bends everything until it looks official. I let the silence hang. Terrell leaned against the wall, staring at the floor, the weight of his guilt pressing his shoulders down. I've kept my mouth shut for years, he said. I let her intimidate families, bleed them with fines, bully people into selling their homes. I told myself it wasn't my fight. But when she shoved your wife, his voice cracked. That was it for me. I can't pretend anymore. I stepped closer, my voice calm but edged with steel. Then put it on record. You're the treasurer. Your word matters. Tell the county what you just told me. He looked up sharply, panic flashing in his eyes. Do you know what she'll do to me, to my family? She controls everything here. She controls fear, I countered. That's all. The moment you speak, that power dies. You want out? This is your way. For a long moment, Terrell just breathed heavily, chest rising and falling, as if he were running a marathon standing still. Then he pulled a folded sheet from his pocket and handed it to me with shaking hands. I drafted this statement. I didn't know if I'd have the courage to give it to anyone. But if you're really taking this to the county, then use it. I unfolded the paper. In his neat accountant's handwriting, Terrell had detailed Cynthia's repeated violations of the bylaws, her unilateral decisions, the falsified approvals. He'd even cited dates and attached copies of memos she'd ordered him to shred. This is enough to bring her down, I said, meeting his eyes. He swallowed hard. Just, don't let her know it came from me. Not yet. I tucked the paper into my folder, feeling its weight join the arsenal I was building. You've done the right thing, Terrell. You'll see. He exhaled shakily, some of the tension draining from his frame. For the first time, his posture straightened. Not fully, but enough to show the burden was beginning to lift. As I walked out of the shed into the bright afternoon, the sound of tennis balls cracking against rackets rang sharp in the air. Cynthia thought she was still in control, but now the truth was bleeding out from her own board. The treasurer she counted on for silence had just handed me the key to her undoing. The paper Terrell had slipped into my hands felt like a live wire. Every word on that page was a confession, a direct crack in Cynthia Bellamy's armor. But evidence alone doesn't topple tyrants. It has to be set in motion, delivered where it can't be buried. That meant the courthouse downtown, the one place Cynthia's reach couldn't taint. The next morning, I drove through the city's maze of traffic with the folder on the seat beside me. Emily had begged me not to go alone, but I couldn't bring her. The stress was already pressing on her body, and the courthouse wasn't a place for someone 7 months pregnant to sit through hours of legal procedure. Instead, she kissed my cheek before I left, her hand lingering on my arm like she was transferring strength into me. The courthouse rose from the heart of the city like a fortress of stone and glass. Wide marble steps stretched to tall bronze doors etched with the state seal. Inside, the air was cool, humming with the low sounds of footsteps, whispered conversations, and the distant slam of a gavel echoing down a hallway. I walked to the clerk's office and signed the paperwork, filing both the police report supplement and Terrell's written statement into the official record. The clerk, a woman with sharp glasses and a sharper tone, stamped each page with a heavy thud. That sound, the seal of the court, was like a hammer cracking Cynthia's facade. When I stepped back outside, the city air hit me warm and alive. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the tide was turning. Cynthia wasn't facing me anymore. She was facing the law, and the law doesn't flinch at pearl necklaces and smug smiles. But I knew better than to underestimate her. Cynthia had spent years consolidating control in Lakeside Estates. She wouldn't roll over quietly. If anything, the pressure would drive her into reckless moves, and reckless people leave trails. That evening, back in the neighborhood, I took a walk along the golf course paths that wound behind rows of luxury homes. The grass was trimmed to surgical precision, sprinklers hissing in perfect arcs. This was Cynthia's pride, the part of Lakeside she paraded whenever county officials visited. And it was here that I ran into her, standing with two other board members near the 9th hole, clipboard in hand. Her eyes locked on me instantly, narrowing like blades. "Mr. Mercer," she called out, her voice carrying across the manicured lawn. "Enjoying your stroll while ignoring your outstanding balance?" I stopped a few feet away, calm, folder still under my arm. "Balance?" I said evenly. "Funny, because I just came from the courthouse. The county will be very interested to know how you've been issuing fines without board votes." The color drained slightly from one board member's face. The other shifted on his feet, glancing at Cynthia like he was waiting for orders. She didn't flinch, but I caught the twitch in her jaw, the subtle shift of panic hiding under her poise. "You think a few papers will save you?" she hissed. "This community knows who I am. They'll side with me over some lawyer with a grudge." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so the board members had to lean in to hear. "I'm not asking them to side with me. I'm asking them to side with the truth. And when a county judge reads the treasurer's signed confession about falsified votes and illegal fines, well, Cynthia, that won't be my word against yours. Anymore. That'll be the law against you." The silence that followed was deafening. The board members exchanged uneasy looks, and one cleared his throat nervously. Cynthia forced a laugh, brittle and sharp, before turning back to her clipboard. But I saw it. Her control was slipping. The people around her weren't seeing a leader anymore. They were seeing liability. As I walked away, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the green. Every step felt lighter. The net was tightening, and she knew it. Terrell's confession had turned the tide. The courthouse had given it weight. And soon, the law would do what the neighborhood couldn't: strip Cynthia Bellamy of the crown she'd never deserved. As I walked away from the golf course, Cynthia's brittle laugh still echoing behind me, I knew her facade was crumbling. But cornered people don't retreat. They lash out. I braced for it, certain her next move would be desperate. And I was right. By morning, a notice was taped to my front door, printed in bold letters across the top. "Final eviction warning." Emily found it first, her trembling hands clutching the paper when I came downstairs. "She can't do this," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "Daniel, we own this house. She can't evict us." I took the notice, scanning the official-looking header, the dense blocks of text. Cynthia had gone too far this time. The HOA had no legal authority to evict a homeowner from their property. Fines, yes. Liens, in extreme cases. But eviction? That belonged only to the courts. And she had just handed me proof of criminal intimidation. The place to deal with this wasn't the porch or the clubhouse anymore. It was the county inspector's office, a gray municipal building that looked as lifeless as the rules it enforced. Inside, rows of metal filing cabinets and the hum of fluorescent lights set the stage for battles far less glamorous than the courtroom dramas, but battles that decided lives nonetheless. I laid the eviction notice on the inspector's desk. The man behind it, Inspector Harris, raised an eyebrow as he adjusted his glasses. "HOA tried to evict you? On their own authority?" "Yes," I said, placing Cynthia's earlier violation notices beside it. "Here's the trail. Escalating fines, no board approvals, and now this. She's manufacturing power that doesn't exist." Harris leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "I've had complaints about Lakeside Estates before, but nothing this blatant. If what you're saying holds up, and this notice is real, It's fraud, maybe even extortion. It's real, I said, voice hard. And she shoved my pregnant wife into the street 2 weeks ago. This isn't a civil squabble anymore. It's criminal. He nodded, pulling a form from a drawer and beginning to write. We'll open an official investigation. I'll forward this to the county attorney and the sheriff's office. If she's been abusing her position, she's in serious trouble. When I walked out, folder heavier than ever with stamped copies, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. Cynthia's arrogance had driven her straight into a trap of her own making. She thought intimidation would silence me. Instead, it gave me the weapon I needed to bring the full weight of outside authority crashing down. Back in Lakeside, word was already spreading. Neighbors gathered in small clusters along the sidewalks, whispering as I passed. Someone had leaked the eviction notice, or maybe Cynthia had flaunted it herself, thinking it would cow the community. But the looks on my neighbors' faces told a different story. They weren't afraid anymore. They were outraged. One older man, Mr. Patterson, stopped me near the mailbox station. "Daniel," he said quietly, "is it true she tried to evict you?" I nodded. He shook his head, eyes narrowing. "That woman's gone too far. My wife's been saying for years she was dangerous. Maybe now people will listen." The tide was shifting, and Cynthia could feel it. That evening, as Emily and I sat on the porch swing, a black SUV rolled slowly down the street and stopped in front of our house. Cynthia stepped out, her heels clicking against the asphalt. She didn't come up the steps this time. She stayed at the curb, glaring at me with fury barely contained. "You think you've won something?" she spat. "You're just a lawyer with a grudge. This community was mine before you, and it'll be mine long after you're gone." I stood, keeping my voice steady. "No, Cynthia. This community doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the families you've been terrorizing, and soon you'll answer to the law you thought you were above." Her face twisted, and without another word, she climbed back into the SUV and sped off. The neighbors who had gathered nearby watched in silence, their eyes following her retreat. They'd just seen the queen stripped of her crown, even if the final blow hadn't landed yet. I sat back on the swing beside Emily, the cool night air wrapping around us. The pieces were all in place now, the witness statement, the illegal fines, the fraudulent eviction notice. Cynthia had written her own downfall. All I had to do was let the law read it aloud. The night Cynthia sped off in her SUV left a tension hanging over Lakeside like storm clouds refusing to break. Neighbors had seen her rage, they'd heard her threats, and now they were watching to see what I would do next. I didn't have the luxury of waiting. The case I was building couldn't remain hidden in files and quiet conversations. It needed daylight. It needed to be seen. The opportunity came faster than expected. A notice appeared in every resident's mailbox. Mandatory emergency HOA meeting. Attendance required. Cynthia's attempt to reassert control. Her gamble was obvious. Gather the community, project power, and crush dissent. Publicly. But she hadn't counted on the arsenal of evidence I'd assembled, or the fact that people were no longer cowed by her voice. The meeting was scheduled in the high school gym just outside the subdivision. Bigger space, bigger audience, bigger risks for her. That gym smelled faintly of varnished floors and chalk dust, the kind of place built for contests of strength and spectacle. Tonight, it would serve both. Emily insisted on coming, though I worried. "They need to see me," she said firmly, her hand resting on her stomach. "They need to see who she hurt." There was no arguing with that kind of resolve. When we arrived, the bleachers were already filling. Residents whispered in tight circles, glancing toward Cynthia at the center of the court. She stood behind a folding table draped with a Lakeside Estates banner, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her smile sharp and brittle. The other board members flanked her like uneasy soldiers forced into formation. I led Emily to a front row seat. Conversations hushed, eyes following us as we walked across the polished floor. For the first time, people were seeing not just a man in a fight with the HOA, but a family under siege. Emily's presence was a silent accusation more powerful than anything I could say. Cynthia tapped the microphone, her voice slicing through the murmur of the crowd. "Residents of Lakeside Estates, thank you for coming. We are here to address recent disruptions caused by one homeowner refusing to comply with community standards. Mr. Mercer has spread misinformation and threatened the stability of our neighborhood. Tonight, we will set the record straight." She paused for effect, scanning the bleachers with the practiced confidence of a politician. This community thrives because of discipline, order, and strong leadership. Without it, property values decline, and we all suffer. I have dedicated years to protecting Lakeside, and I will not allow one man's personal vendetta to jeopardize what we've built. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some nodded, but others crossed their arms, skeptical. The silence was fragile, waiting to be claimed. I stood, folder in hand, and walked to the microphone at the center of the court, my voice cut clean and steady. What she hasn't told you is that she's been issuing fines without board approval, falsifying votes, and even attempting to evict homeowners without legal authority. Gasps erupted. Cynthia tried to interject, but I raised the folder high. These aren't claims. These are documents, signed statements, copies of notices, and bylaws she's violated again and again. I opened the folder, pulling out the eviction notice first. This was taped to my door. An illegal attempt to force my pregnant wife and me out of our home. An HOA has no power to evict. None. This is fraud, and it's intimidation. Voices rippled through the gym. A woman in the back shouted, "She fined us for a rosebush last year," another man muttered. I knew it. The cracks were widening in real time. Then I revealed Terrell's statement, holding it up so the crowd could see the bold signature at the bottom. "This is from your treasurer. He admits she ordered him to falsify minutes to cover her tracks. He couldn't stay silent anymore." All eyes turned to Terrell, seated stiffly at the board table. He looked down, then slowly nodded, his voice trembling but audible. "It's true. She made me do it. I can't keep covering for her." The gym erupted. Neighbors shouted, some standing, others turning on Cynthia with open anger. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice breaking through the noise. "Lies! All lies!" But the fury in her tone only fueled the disbelief around her. I looked directly at her, my voice calm but unshakable. "This isn't your courtroom, Cynthia. The county has the evidence. The sheriff has the report. And soon, a judge will have the final word. You've ruled by fear long enough. Tonight, that ends." The noise in the gym swelled, no longer whispers but a storm of voices breaking free. Cynthia's eyes darted across the crowd, searching for the control she'd lost. And in that moment, everyone in Lakeside Estates saw her for what she truly was. Not a protector, not a leader, but a tyrant exposed. The storm inside the gym didn't quiet easily. Neighbors shouted over one another, some demanding Cynthia step down immediately. Others still clinging to her false promises about protecting property values. But the balance had shifted, and for the first time, fear wasn't her weapon anymore. It was outrage, and it wasn't pointed at me. It was aimed squarely at her. Cynthia banged the microphone with her palm, her voice cracking as she tried to cut through the noise. "Order! You will respect this board." But the gavel of public opinion was already slamming harder than anything she could wield. I stepped back, letting the crowd speak for itself. This wasn't about me shouting louder than her. It was about the truth finding its way into the open. Emily sat in the front row, her presence as visible as the swelling curve of her stomach, a living reminder of Cynthia's cruelty. When neighbors looked at her, they didn't see non-compliance. They saw a woman shoved into the street by the very person demanding obedience. Then a voice rose above the chaos. "She assaulted a pregnant woman," Mr. Patterson barked from the bleachers, his face red with fury. "We all heard about it. Are we supposed to pretend that never happened?" The room went silent, as if the words had cast a spell. All eyes shifted to Cynthia, her face drained of color, but she forced a smile, brittle as glass. "That's a dangerous accusation," she said, her voice quivering beneath the veneer of calm. "It's not an accusation," I said evenly. "It's a police report." I lifted another page from my folder, the stamped copy from Officer Ramirez's file. Filed the night it happened, witness statements included. She didn't just violate bylaws, she broke the law. Gasps echoed, sharper this time. Cynthia's composure cracked. She gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles whitened. The board members beside her shifted uncomfortably, one sliding his chair back, as though trying to put space between himself and her imploding authority. That's when Terrell stood. His movements were stiff, his face pale, but his voice carried across the gym. "It's true. I was there when the board discussed it afterward. She told us to deny everything. She told us to stick to her version or we'd pay the price. His hands trembled, but he didn't sit back down. I can't do it anymore. She crossed every line, and we all know it. The eruption was immediate. Neighbors stood, clapping, shouting, demanding Cynthia resign. The gym shook with the roar of a community that had been silent too long. Cynthia's mask shattered. "You ungrateful cowards," she screeched, her voice raw. "Without me, you'd be nothing but weeds and broken fences. You think the county cares about you? I made this place worth living in." Her words only fanned the flames. People jeered, booed, some shouting back their own stories of intimidation. Garden fines, driveway inspections, threats of liens. Each voice added another nail to the coffin of her authority. I stepped to the microphone one last time, my voice calm but cutting through the uproar. "Cynthia Bellamy, you've ruled this community through fear and lies. But tonight, everyone here has seen the truth. You assaulted my wife. You falsified records. You abused your power. And the county is already moving forward with charges. This isn't just the end of your presidency. This is the end of your reign of terror." Emily's hand found mine as the noise swelled again, the gym pulsing with a unity no one thought possible weeks earlier. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now stood shoulder to shoulder, their anger no longer silent, their fear broken. Cynthia grabbed the microphone, but the sound system cut out. Whether from technical failure or sabotage, I'll never know. She shouted into dead air, her words lost in the roar of the crowd. Finally, she hurled the microphone aside and stormed toward the exit, her heels clacking against the hardwood like the retreating steps of a toppled tyrant. The crowd followed her with their eyes until the gym doors slammed shut. Then, almost as one, they turned to me and Emily. The applause wasn't polite. It was raw, cathartic, the release of years of pent-up frustration. I squeezed Emily's hand, my chest rising with the knowledge that the fight was nearly over. The law was already in motion, but tonight, something just as important had happened. The community itself had risen, and Cynthia Bellamy had no throne left to sit on. The echoes of the steep. Jim's applause still rang in my ears long after the doors closed behind Cynthia. But public humiliation wasn't the end. It was only the spark. The real reckoning came 2 days later at the county courthouse, where her crimes would finally be weighed by the law she'd spent years pretending didn't apply to her. The courthouse steps were crowded with neighbors that morning, more than I expected. Word had spread fast, and lakeside residents who once whispered behind curtains now stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see justice with their own eyes. Emily walked beside me, steady despite her pregnancy, her hand locked around mine. The porch swing that started it all seemed a world away, but it was still in my mind, still the reason I refused to bend. Inside, the courtroom hummed with tension. Judge Eleanor Price sat at the bench, her gaze sharp. No nonsense. Cynthia was brought in by deputies, her pearl necklace gone, her hair less perfect than usual. She didn't look like the queen of Lakeside Estates anymore. She looked like what she was, a defendant. The proceedings moved swiftly. Officer Ramirez gave his testimony, recounting the night Emily was shoved into the street. His words were steady, professional, leaving no room for Cynthia's denials. Then came Terrell. He stepped nervously to the witness stand, but when he began speaking, the dam broke. He told everything about the falsified minutes, the illegal fines, the intimidation tactics. He admitted his silence, but he also confessed his guilt. By the time he finished, his voice cracked with relief, as though the weight of years had been lifted from his shoulders. Cynthia tried to fight back. Her attorney painted her as a dedicated leader misunderstood by ungrateful residents. But the evidence was overwhelming. The eviction notice, the police report, Terrell's statement. All of it stacked like bricks in a wall she couldn't climb. Judge Price's gavel slammed, her voice firm. This court finds sufficient cause to order the immediate arrest of Cynthia Bellamy on charges of assault, falsification of records, and abuse of authority under state property statutes. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily gripped my hand so tightly it hurt, tears pooling in her eyes. For a moment, time seemed suspended as deputies stepped forward, placing cuffs on the woman who had ruled Lakeside with fear. Cynthia's protests rang hollow, her once commanding voice reduced to frantic pleas that no one believed anymore. As she was let out, the room erupted, not with chaos but with something purer, applause, relief. Neighbors stood, clapping, some even crying. For the first time, Lakeside Estates wasn't under her shadow. When we stepped outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps cheered. Strangers shook my hand. Mr. Patterson clapped me on the back, muttering, "About damn time." Emily leaned into me, her face glowing with pride and exhaustion. And in that moment, I knew we hadn't just won for ourselves. We'd won for everyone who had ever been silenced by her threats. Back home, I sat on the porch swing with Emily, the evening light washing over us. The swing creaked gently, the same sound that had sparked all of this. It wasn't just wood and rope anymore. It was proof that some things are worth fighting for. Proof that fear can be broken. Proof that one act of cruelty can ignite an entire community to rise. I thought of my father then, the man who built this swing, who believed in protecting others no matter the cost. His legacy lived in the wood beneath us, in the child Emily carried, and in the community that had finally found its voice. Cynthia Bellamy was gone, stripped of her power, facing the justice she thought she was immune to. Lakeside Estates would rebuild, not on fear, but on unity. And for the first time since moving here, I felt like this neighborhood truly belonged to us all. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.